Hi, good evening. My name is Pennie Pierce. I'm going live this evening to talk about the journey that I have made in my life from pain to freedom. And basically, again, my last video, I seem to say basically quite a few times. So it's also learning to take myself lightly. So I just wanted to basically tell this story to help and inspire other people to make a similar journey. And in that journey, as I was saying, it is from the pain I felt when I disconnected with myself. I started life the youngest of four children, so I had three elder siblings, and I was very much a nature's child growing up. I loved to be outside. I loved to be doing all sorts of different things. I had a couple of imaginary friends. I was into fairies and all sorts of different things in nature. And I enjoyed myself and I had quite a happy childhood. The biggest problem I came across when I was growing up was I was very slow to learn how to read, and dyslexia was not necessarily recognised when I was a child. And I was taken to a whole bunch of different specialists to try and find out the reason why I wasn't learning how to read. I was actually brilliant at arithmetic, so they realised that there wasn't too much wrong with my brain. I just couldn't perceive letters and words very well. And as I said, I went for hearing tests. I was paraded around a whole bunch of specialists. And suddenly I think realised that there was something definitely different about me, very different compared with my siblings. And I suppose that started to eat away a little bit at my self-confidence and my ability to see things the way that other people saw things, or what I perceived other people saw things. I would always see the big picture rather than the small picture. I didn't get to bogged down by what other people thought, except for, obviously my own feelings towards myself. Um, my siblings all went to grammar school. I didn't pass the exams because the math part of the exam was actually written in words and I couldn't perceive how to understand what the questions were. As I said, actually arithmetic I could do, which was numbers. So I stayed on at school. I obviously went to school, and I stayed on at school because I wanted to become a nurse. And you needed a certain amount of qualifications to obviously get into nursing in those days. And I trained as a state registered nurse. And so I stayed on at school past 16 for another 2 years to get the O levels to be able to become a nurse. And I did crazy subjects like drama and art and various other bits and pieces, but I managed to scrape together the 5 O levels that I needed to get into nursing. Once I got into nursing, and once I felt that nursing was something that I wanted to do, I actually did pretty well. I managed to keep up with all the work. SRNs were very much trained like apprentices. And so we did a certain amount of time in nursing school, and then we went out onto the wards and gained the clinical experience. And I can remember going for a visit on one of the wards, and basically walking down the ward, and this was a Nightingale ward, an old-fashioned ward, which was very much like a corridor with beds one side and beds the other side. And I was walking down the ward, and the staff nurse, one of the staff nurses, turned around to me and said, "Go and give Mrs. Jones a cup of tea," and told me which bed it was this patient was in. So I walked down the ward and went up to where her bed was, and the curtains were drawn. And at the beginning, I thought, "Ooh, do I actually walk in behind the curtains, or do I stay outside the curtains?" Because again, you're told to make sure that you pay attention to people's privacy. So eventually, I entered the curtains, and this lady was sitting up in bed, and I tried to give her her cup of tea, but the tea dribbled down one side and then dribbled down another, and I basically, obviously a very young nurse at this stage, walked out of the curtains and approached just another staff nurse. And staff nurses were, not gods, but they were really very, very important people on the wards. Usually only one or two of them around. So I went up to another staff nurse and basically said, "I've been trying to feed Mrs. Jones a cup of tea, and she's not taking it." And this woman turned around to me and just basically looked at me as if I was berserk and said, "Well, I'm not surprised. She died 10 minutes ago." And my whole safe life fell apart. I couldn't believe the experience I had just had. I mean, I hadn't, at this stage in my life, had never seen anybody throw up. I was the youngest of my family. Nobody had ever been ill. And at that moment, my 18-year-old life imploded. And I remember just taking a breath and thinking, if this is it, if this is what being an adult is, if this is what I have to get used to, I've got to seriously buck up my ideas. And I can just remember going off the ward and having a conversation with my tutor, and he said, "You're just going to have to toughen up, Penny, because this is what happens." And part of me realised that would be quite helpful, but the other part was screaming, "This is just not okay with me." And, again, having another conversation with other people and other people who were having different conversations because we were very new to nursing at that stage. We just basically realized that, okay, this was a time for a gin, So this is how my life went, was actually realizing, I had to toughen up. I had to not be that nature's child anymore, but actually take things quite seriously. When I look at that decision in my life, I think what a poor decision I made at that stage of my life. But I just thought that, if I wanted to be a nurse, if I wanted to help other people, I just needed to, as I said, toughen up a little bit. And over time, when you're exposed to more things as a nurse, because as a young nurse, you literally, all of your romance of holding hands and, sort of helping people, on a day-to-day level, actually, some of the romance of it is ripped away by reality and what you're actually experiencing every day. And, over time, obviously, I did toughen up. I chose to work in children's nursing for a while. And, being being a children's nurse is a very difficult task, especially when you've got children who are ill, who are in pain. Children are the most amazing people to work with because, you know, they can have serious diseases and serious pathology, yet if they're not in pain, they're belting around the ward on a bike, or they're playing a game, or they're painting. It's when they're in pain, obviously, it is quite desperate. And as a nurse, you don't toughen up. You know, people say, you know, you become tough. No, you don't. You take it very, very personally. And also, but when you can't deal with it, when you don't have debriefs, and you don't have you know, the senior nurses actually giving you a helping hand to process emotions, you suppress them, and you suppress them big time. And you know, I can remember, you know, obviously I've worked, I've had an amazing life with nursing, and I've worked as a nurse all over the world. You know, I've been in the Sudan. I've done all sorts of different stuff as a nurse. But you don't toughen up. You do take it personally, and at some stage you're going to have to deal with those emotions. So also, I have had a couple of quite traumatic experiences in my life where I was actually raped at the age of 23 by three men who dragged me down an alley and left me for dead. And ended up in hospital myself. It was only a few months after I'd moved from Northampton, where I did my nursing training, down to Great Ormond Street, where I did my registered sick children's nursing. And again, it was not okay as far as I was concerned. It never happened. I went into silence, probably because of the stress and not knowing how to deal with it. As far as I was concerned, when the police came and interviewed me in the hospital, I just said I was mugged. And the rest of it, I just completely disowned, because I just didn't know. I didn't have the tools, I didn't have the family support, and I didn't have anybody that I could talk to it about. So I just put it in a box. Unfortunately, as we know, that if you put something like that in a box, at some stage it's going to come out, and it will come out in such a dramatic way. However, moving through this story, just to give you a brief overview of where I got to in my life. I had done a lot of different trauma nursing. After I trained there, I took off overseas and travelled. The only problem is when you travel, yes, you can be distracted from the pain. Yes, you can be distracted by using all sorts of different tools, by, doing dangerous sports. And, I would leap out of aircraft, I would go diving with sharks, I would do anything to distract myself from the fact that I was being crippled by my inner pain. And it wasn't until a lot later in my life that I actually found a tool that helped. But, every night for 15 years, every time I closed my eyes, I would go back to that scenario. And I just couldn't understand or get my head around the fact that I couldn't actually talk about it. I couldn't actually break the silence. And it wasn't until I was in my late 20s, early 30s, after I had already run away to sea and been in the Merchant Navy for a couple of years, I came back and my health started to become destroyed. And I had a diagnosis of MS. And if you don't want to feel something, what a brilliant pathology to attract is MS, because it destroys your nerves and you cannot feel things. And at that stage, I started a homeopathic course and met some great people who I first actually broke the silence to. And it was through breaking that silence and actually beginning to work through the pain, the disbelief, the trauma, and didn't realize until that stage I was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder around that trauma, that I actually started to become clearer and be able to be more Pennie. Because actually Pennie had turned into a very professional nurse, but very, very much not much else. So I had to rediscover and start looking at ways of clearing that trauma and rediscovering myself and rediscovering the joy and the spontaneity I had as a child. And as I did that, what came in was more love, more joy. At first, I didn't quite trust it. I didn't quite understand it. But as I did move through it, it became a tangible thing. And, when you actually are attracted to something, which again for me was more love, more joy, more spontaneity, what you can actually do is attract more of it in. I just didn't have that in my late 20s, early 30s. And until I actually started to empty out the containers of emotions. And as I did that, obviously I learned a lot, and I realized that actually you can breathe through anything. You can breathe through any trauma. You can breathe through any emotion, as long as you realize that it is helpful to you. So as I started down that journey of self-healing, what I managed to attract was all sorts of exciting different things into my life. And as I actually processed more stuff, I actually began to be able to rebuild who Pennie was. And I can remember a stage when I first started on this journey that, Sister Quayle used to go to work, because at that stage in my life I was a senior nurse. So Sister Quayle used to go to work, but Pennie was never allowed, because if I took Pennie to work, Pennie could get hurt. So I was always Sister Quayle at work, and I was very effective and efficient and top of my field. But when I actually started to reintroduce Pennie to work, the first couple of days was pretty scary, but people actually started to, I was known as a very effective person. But when I actually started to soften as Pennie, people used to relate to me better, and I used to actually get on with my team better. And introducing the fact that we never had an emergency situation without a debrief. And people were asked at that debrief, how did they feel? This was unheard of in nursing in the 80s. Teams didn't work that way. And what I actually found was, when I actually allowed that to happen, I grew more in confidence. I grew more as a person. And I also grew more to be able to share the love and the spontaneity and the joy. And, I was known basically in the end of being able to have, a good time in a paper bag. But that was when my ridiculous sense of humour re-established itself. So you can move through any trauma. The only reason I'm sharing this with you tonight is so that you realize that whatever happens in your life, you can move through it. But it takes work, it takes commitment to self, and it takes an enormous good sense of humor to take yourself lightly. And it's really important to realize that, you know, people look at me and go, oh, you know, Penny, it's okay for you, you've had a brilliant life. And I have had a brilliant life, and I wouldn't want to get rid of any of the experiences that I've had, because they have made me who I am today. But one of the things you realize is you need to be compassionate to self. When strife comes, or a difficult situation comes, or whatever it be, is you need to be able to nurture self and take care of your own authentic needs. You know, I've had many different situations in my life where, you know, you just have to take care of you, and you have to learn to parent yourself, because, you know, parents, you know, sometimes are not the people that you want to talk to, um, because they could be judging you from the past, or, you know, they have ways of doing things. And family members are fantastic people, but they're not always necessarily the best people to process your pain with. You know, very much, I know with my own mother, she would say to me, get a grip, or whatever it is. um, you know, I love them to pieces, but they're not necessarily the people that I would trust to help me deal with my stuff. So, you know, having processed the stuff, committed to nurturing self and committing to parent self, you know, you can move through, as I've said, any trauma. But then you can also start to bring in some of the things that your preferences, some of the things that you would like to experience. And it wasn't until I was in my 40s that I met and married my husband, who, by the way, looks like a Greek god and is an amazing guy. And it wasn't until 14 months ago that I had a son. So when you actually look at it, life never finishes. You know, it's not over at all. You know, whatever age you are, wherever you're at, you can create beauty in your life, as long as you start paying attention to your own needs and your own preferences. And it's very much important to be able to do that. And that's why, you know, the only reason I have shared some of the pain that I've had in my life is to show you that you can move through it at any stage. And it may be just attracting or asking for somebody to come into your life who can help you deal with the challenges that you have. Um, is there any? I would just like to open up any questions or anything else anybody would like to say, because I also want to keep these live sessions to a half an hour, because otherwise people just get bored with listening to your stuff, and they want to either get involved, or they want to go and have their lunch or their tea or supper right now. So very much reiterating the message that I would like to get across in this particular Facebook Live is to know that whatever suffering or whatever pain that you have been in your life, you can rise above it with help. You can heal it with help. But it's very much up to you and each individual to do the work that they feel is necessary in order to move through and get back to happiness, joy, and love. Very much love. Love of self, love of others. So, again, I will say to you good evening and good night. And I am going to be doing Facebook Lives every Monday for the next few weeks. And the next Facebook I would like to introduce or talk about is actually being the guilt and the grief of being a new mother. So I hope you can turn up for that one. And, you know, enjoy yourselves, and may you have a very, very good evening. Thank you. Good night.